Welcome everyone to Songs, Poetry and Poetry Song. Really delighted to have you all with us. This is a panel discussion about two coffee break concerts. Coffee break concert number 9 for OperaUpClose, which was Shakespeare Reshaped, and then the one we launched this afternoon, which is Calming the Tempest, which includes some Shakespeare, and then using the idea of the Tempest and Ariel as a jumping off point. That took us to Sylvia Plath, and also included the world premiere of Nicholas O'Neill's beautiful Emily Dickinson song cycle. We are recording this event, but only the panel are visible. So if you're watching at home in your pajamas, that's okay, don't worry. And only the panel can be heard. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will try to get to them towards the end of this session. It's going to be 45 minutes long. I'm going to start with some questions to the panel and a bit of a discussion, and then come to audience questions towards the end of the session. And if you have any issues throughout, you can also put a message in the chat, and Jay from OperaUpClose will try and help with any technical issues. Just to introduce our panel, we have Nicholas O'Neill, who is a composer and played the piano in our Coffee Break concert number 10, and composed the Emily Dickinson song cycle. We also have Joseph Doody, who's a tenor, who performed in both Coffee Break concert 9 and 10 very beautifully. Kat Rose Martin, who wrote a new piece for the Shakespeare Reshaped.
Well, Kat also wrote her own piece and performed it as a response. It was sort of a response to Ford, but not really a response to Ford at all, but a response to Shakespeare, and also some Isabella from Measure for Measure, which is a troublesome play. So it was really exciting to hear it done that way. And I'm Flora McIntosh. I'm the artistic associate at OperaUpClose, and I am also a singer and was privileged enough to be able to premiere Nick's song cycles, Emily Dickinson song cycles, this afternoon, which is a great pleasure.
I'm Norton-Hale. I'm the artistic director of OperaUpClose. So hopefully we will also be joined by Athena Stevens, who is an actor and a writer and performed Sylvia Plath's The Bee Meeting and Emily Dickinson's poem Hope is the Thing with Feathers. Grief is the Thing with Feathers is the Max Porter book in our Coffee Break concert number 10 this afternoon. So first of all, I'd like to ask Nick, it was a huge pleasure and privilege to have the premiere of your 3 glorious Emily Dickinson songs this afternoon. Can you tell us a little bit about the creation process? Am I right in thinking that it was your idea to use Emily Dickinson poems?
Yes, as I recall, that's correct. The commission came from Baroness McIntosh via my association with the Parliament Choir. I'm their chorus master and also their composer in residence. So I've written several pieces for them over the years. And Baroness McIntosh wanted to commission some songs for her grandchildren. And as I recall it, I was free to go and hunt for texts and poetry as I saw fit. And what I really wanted to do was find poetry that mentioned the 3 months of birth of the children. So there was one for March, one for April, and one for May. So my initial point of departure was to find poetry that mentioned the 3 months, so I could then begin to frame the song cycle around those 3. And to my delight, it turned out that Emily Dickinson had a set of poems, or various different poems, that mentioned the months. I love Emily Dickinson's poetry anyway. There's a kind of freshness and vivacity and a sort of really intriguing modern rhythm to it that appeals to me as a writer. And they just all worked together, and there were a couple of cross references in there as well. So I think the robin that is the subject of the second song is mentioned in the third song, and that just gives you something to begin to hang the music upon when you have words like that. So yes, the decision to use Emily Dickinson was mine, if I recall correctly, but I was kind of led to her poetry by the search for the months in order to make sure that the commission was specific to these 3 children.
And in terms of being commissioned, I'm interested in how, in the relationship between the artist and the person commissioning, or the organisation commissioning, and whether that affects the way you approach it or your writing.
Yes, it's the short answer to that. Each commission is, I approach each commission entirely individually. So just as with these, the idea was to write a set of 3 songs that focused on the 3 months of the birthdays of the 3 grandchildren. So each commission I try to make specific to the commissioner or to a specific place or time or something like that. And that is always my starting point for a new commission, whether it be a piece that I'm writing for the Parliament Choir, for example, or a set of songs or anything instrumental. I try and find something that is specific to the commissioner or to the organization, or even sometimes to the concert hall where it might be premiered, or something historical like an anniversary, and that becomes my jumping off point for the writing of the music. And I tend to find that those ideas then inspire, musical kernels, musical ideas, which I can then expand, and then everything starts to grow into everything else in a wonderful way, like like flowers emerging in springtime, which seems particularly appropriate at the moment.
Great. And apologies that I don't know more about your work with the Parliament Choir, but because it's the Parliament Choir, are you writing a lot of music that is sort of specific, commemorative of particular official events or that kind of thing?
Not quite so much. It's more to do with the choir itself. So I think the first piece I wrote as composer in residence to the Parliament Choir was a setting of the prayers that are said in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords before the daily sessions. So there I took the text and sort of interwove them and found correspondences between the 2 prayers, and wrote a piece that was specifically parliamentary, as it were. But other than that, it's often been focused around the choir's performances. So in 2014 or 15, I think, we were fortunate enough to be able to perform in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, which was a rare privilege. And so the piece I wrote for that concert was built around music that was written by the composers who were at Notre Dame 850 years ago, right at the beginning of written music as we understand it now. And there have been other ones that have fitted into specific repertoire. So we did a concert a few years ago which had the Vivaldi 4 Seasons, and I set a sonnet about the 4 seasons of life. So it's always to do with a specific concert or the thing that happens to be going on. And often Simon, who's the music director of the choir, will say, this is what we're planning to do, and this is the repertoire that we have, and this is where we're doing it. And then I'll go away and come up with some idea and come back to him with that. And then we just work from there. So it's less to do with parliamentary occasions than it is to do with the Parliament Choir concerts, but it's always specific to to what we're doing at that particular time. So although we have reperformed several of those pieces, for the premieres, they are definitely for that specific concert.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. And just going to Kat now, Kat Rose Martin, picking up issues around the same topic. So as Flora mentioned, OperaUpClose commissioned you to write a piece that responded to some of the Shakespeare material in our last coffee break concert, Reshaping Shakespeare, or Shakespeare Reshaped. And from our perspective, I mean, actually personally, from my perspective, I know that commission stemmed partly from my desire to not leave the violent jealousy of Ford kind of unchallenged or uncommented upon in Verdi's version of Ford, who is, as Shakespeare's, extremely jealous. But what you came up with is completely brilliant and very funny and has a powerful point, but actually is not really explicitly a response to Ford at all. So I just wondered if you could talk us through that process and how you got to where you got to.
Well, I think because we were doing both, like we were going to do both a Shakespeare piece and then a piece that came as a response to the work, I ended up like finding the Isabella piece, Measure, Measure, and going, oh, this feels like a response to Ford's aria, like the way that she talks. And that felt like a response. So I then felt to do a double response would be a bit, that's like a bit like repeating the point, like what is the next touch point of we've got that jealous rage, we've got her going, great Men of Thunder, yeah, great, and then what's the next step of the argument and the conversation? And I guess then, so I thought, well, what further do I add? And I started to look at for the content in general, Falstaff, the opera version. And I was very inspired by the host of Garterin, or the silent roles within the opera. And I just thought, how hilarious if you were playing the silent role, like, telling your mum and dad, I finally made it, I'm in the opera, I don't sing. Like how funny that was. And that just kind of resonated with me. And then I started to think about, well, actually, you know, as an actor, even when you get to, you know, audition for big parts, like you're still like, yeah, I'm in one scene. Yeah, I played Juliet, it's the title part. Yeah, she dies. Like what is that then, that escalation, and how does that also pull that right into the modern day? Like, how does that feel for us now as women, and how do we pull that conversation into the modern day so that it's relatable to everybody? Like, what does that jealousy mean? What is a woman's response then? And then how do we continue that conversation? So that's sort of where it came from.
Yeah.
Just kind of a widening of worlds gradually.
Yeah,
and
I remember you sent me a kind of brilliant brain dump, which was literally made me laugh out loud, but it kind of went from this idea of how hilarious to be a silent role in opera. And it's so funny because I work in opera and I know a lot of operas have silent roles. It kind of hadn't occurred to me how inherently amusing the concept of a silent role in opera was before. And then it took you coming a bit from the outside to make me think, oh yeah, that's completely bizarre. And you brought in Beyonce, and I think you were planning almost like 4 different pieces, and then they all ended up in the same pieces.
Yeah, that's it. I was like, oh, I could do this idea, I could do this idea, I could do this idea, and then I think in the same email I went, oh, actually, I think they might all be one idea that I could just all put together. And then my writing process after you went, yay, that made me laugh, and that giving that permission, which is what, you know, sometimes artists need to then go away and just let all of that flow, kind of where the poem came from.
Right, and also similarly to what I was saying to Nick, do you presumably you sometimes write without a commission? Does that feel like quite a different process or not?
I mean, I try not to anymore, but yes and no. I think sometimes somebody comes to you with quite a closed brief, and like with this, you know, I won't like profess to be an expert in operas, you know, like I know a bit of Shakespeare, you know, like I'm definitely like the whole stranger to the world. But when somebody comes to you with a brief, I always think it's important to find your way into it, and what is how do things speak to you, and because otherwise I'd never be writing from the heart. So it's got to find a way that I go, right, this is how my brain computes that, whether that's on commission or not on commission. And when I first started writing non-commission, then you're just letting it all out. And sometimes a brief can actually push you into exploring things that you don't necessarily explore, like how, you know, if somebody said, right, I would never even call myself a poet. Like sometimes I just get angry and it rhymes. And like, but when you're pushed into that department, you can go, okay, well, how would I go further with that? How would I not just do Beyonce quotes, and how would I accelerate that? And that commission then pushes you, which I think's sometimes better because you've got someone to answer to.
Yeah, great. And it's also, you know, from a director's point of view, it's sometimes when I'm not arguing for smaller budgets, but sometimes when you have a smaller budget, that's when invention comes, and you know, it's kind of restrictions sometimes are helpful, I guess. I'm really pleased. Sorry, go on.
I think it was great that, you know, this version we weren't trying to pretend to be anything, that like it was great that it was so come as you are, and your take on the world, your angle on the world, and that really made it feel very relatable, like the way that it was all wrapped together.
Yeah, and I guess that's partly what we were trying to do with the concert, especially the Shakespeare, the Coffee Break concert number 9. It was very much like, we're not pretending it's anything other than being filmed in our kitchens, or, you know, and actually make a virtue of that, and reflect, you know, literally reflect the fact that we're stuck at home and not sure when this will end, and trying to find, you know, shoots of hope. I'm really pleased that Athena's joined us. Hi, Athena. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself? You're on mute at the moment.
I can fix that. I hit the unmute button. I know that after your black dog. Hi, I'm Athena Stevens. I am a writer, an actor, and a director. I've worked with Robin fair amount over the past few years and always enjoyed it. And I have been doing stuff online long before it was cool. So that's where I'm coming from, and I'm excited that I got to do something a bit more classical with it now.
Great, thank you. I have some specific questions for you later, but I'm going to come back to you in a moment, if that's okay. So talking of Shakespeare again, obviously a rich source of material for reinventions for centuries, and you know the plays themselves get reinvented all the time. We've got Mark Rylance doing all male productions, Baz Luhrmann, Philip Deloy's Donmar, all female productions, Charlie Josephine as Mercutio quite recently. And I often see a parallel between Shakespeare, that you know there's only a finite number of Shakespeare plays and they keep being reinvented, and opera has quite a small number of big name opera house filling works which get programmed again and again and again, and so they necessarily have to be reinvented. So Joe and Flora as our opera singers, how does that kind of feed into working in opera, the fact that you are doing maybe the same role again and again, or different productions of the same piece? Does that affect the way you approach things?
I think there's two questions in there actually. One which is about the approach. I'm sure Joe will have lots to say about approaching the role, but the other thing about specifically the material, because it's interesting you said Shakespeare's been reinvented for centuries. Well, actually, it sort of hasn't. It only started really being reinvented from the kind of in the latter half of the 20th century, and if we rewound even 30 years ago, but certainly 40 years ago, the sense of saying Shakespeare should be done in a certain way, it must be done like this, and if it's not, then it's you're somehow being irreverent to the material, or you're not not respecting the material, and that is and now actually on the whole, with a few detractors, everyone has accepted that this material can withstand a huge amount of looking at and pulling apart and challenging, and it still remains at its core the material, but it is fundamentally rethought, and actually what Kat was saying, made to resonate with us now. So we're not actually doing historical, we're not doing a museum piece, and actually that's the case even if you set your Henry V at the time that Henry V was around. It doesn't mean necessarily that a thing has to be brought into modern times. Yeah. And I think it is entirely comparable with opera, and that the shoulds that burden opera are many and profound, and I think we are starting to move away from that. I think we're starting to realize that actually an interesting conversation never comes out of, and I say this with enormous respect, but what would the composer have wanted? An interesting conversation, really, well, it might be interesting as history, but it never comes out. And actually nobody says really what would Shakespeare have wanted. Not really. I mean, he would have wanted something because he lived when he lived and we live when we live now. So I think it's about being brave to do things that maybe won't work, or that we don't like, or that actually are really challenged. But I think opera is at a place now where we really need to start shaking off the shoulderaries, and in a way sort of diversifying within the art form, just saying actually it doesn't only have to be one thing. There's certain things that make opera opera, but as long as you understand your core material, you can do whatever you like with it, and it's still the music, and it still carries all of the importance. And I think in that way it's exactly comparable to Shakespeare. So that's that bit.
So Joe, can I get you to talk about maybe how what it feels like to maybe do a role a number of times in lots of different productions?
Oh, I think I've only had that experience with 2 roles, and they're both from Italian opera, not that far apart either, 19th century. They're very, very sort of typical, and I think the main thing that I felt with both of them are is sort of, this challenge is sort of almost a political one in terms of what is the message. I suppose it relates to Shakespeare, particularly with a play like The Taming of the Shrew or something like that. We think, how do we put this on in the 21st century and make it mean something and make it move people when someone is being so poorly treated and it seems to be fine first reading anyway. So I think I completely endorse what Flora said, because you can't just pretend it's that, you know, we're not when we are, as well as where we are. But it's a funny thing. I don't know. I think it's as regards the Shakespeare, well, nobody sort of suggests changing it. Like Flora said, really, the text is the text, and in the same way, the opera is the opera. But almost anything will work, I think, if it's sort of sincerely related to the emotions that you're conveying. So it's amazing what, as an audience member as well as a performer, you sort of just will accept, because it's bringing something out in the piece. Even if, like you mentioned, Baz Luhrmann, and the way, if in the Romeo and Juliet film, the way that he makes the sword make of gun, so that he can use guns instead of swords, and then but he doesn't have to change the text. Something like that's quite a practical move, but in a way you kind of sort of not laugh, but you kind of smirk at it the first time, and then you just accept it for the rest of the film. So I think really it's sort of up to directors to just be, rather than imposing something on it, trying to find something new in it. I've been reading Simon Callows' memoirs recently, just by chance. He was talking about Peter Brook's RSC production of Midsummer Night's Dream, which was in a bit bright white box, and everyone just wearing one very sort of strong primary color, and just, it was incredibly radical at the time, but he said it just brought out all the joy of the piece, that he just had missed that until he saw that production. And it's sort of, I think, thinking of the message of the relationship, the messages that come from the relationships between the character is the main thing. It wouldn't worry me if I turned up to do the Barber of Seville and they said, we're going to set this on the Mir space station. That wouldn't bother me at all. As long as the conversation that led on from that convinced me.
Kat and Athena, have you had the experience of playing the same character in different productions? Because it's something that happens in opera a lot, and I guess maybe less so in theatre.
I'm trying to think. Athena, you might have. I know that you tend to have or coming back to a classic. I don't know if I've necessarily, it's hard to remember because you do things so many times, or even you work on a monologue and then, you know, even doing the Isabella monologue for this, it's taking it completely out of context.
Mm-hmm.
And it's much like what Joe was saying, is I always have to find the why me and then the why now, which is such like, that is such telly rah 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 speak, like, but all I have is my brain, my emotional toolkit, my body, like that's all I have. And then that production is a collaborate, like I'm not going to play it the same every time, because what that director and the rest of that company bring out of the performer will change, and affect, will change your process through that rehearsal and go like, okay, this is the part of me that I'm bringing to this one, which I didn't even know was even there when I was doing it that time. And it's about what keys of the piano is the director playing in order for you to give something different. And that would be sort of the way I'd feel about approaching it. Each process is different. Also, you're at a different stage in your life. So if you're doing it 2 years later, what you're bringing is not a carbon copy of like the Juliet I played at 16 is not the Juliet you're going to play at like 40. And why not? Why, like, what does she bring?
Yeah, the closest I have done to that is with my own work. And that was exactly 2 years later, nearly to the day. And I was a stronger woman at that point. I was a stronger writer at that point. So although the name was the same and the title of the play was the same, I would argue it's not remotely the same character because of the number of rewrites and the number of changes that I went through as a woman in her early 30s during those 2 years. It was completely different.
Yeah. And if I could stay with you for a moment, Athena, you know, it was really wonderful working with you on the bee meeting and the Emily Dickinson poem. The bee meeting in particular is a huge poem in so many ways. It's very dense. Of course, being Sylvia Plath, there are layers and layers and layers of imagery and meaning. And one of the things that you do so beautifully is you use the space around the words so well in your performances. So can you tell us, I mean, I think we had some discoveries when we were rehearsing it about what you were bringing to Plath as a performer.
Yeah, again, Plath is someone I first came to via the bell jar when I was about 14. And so she has followed me, or maybe I have followed her, from Midwestern America, growing up as this bright, shiny, brighter myself, all the way over here to London and throughout my own depression. And now at age 36, nearly 37, I'm outliving her. And somehow I've been fortunate enough to avoid what she wasn't able to avoid, which was the heartache and the depression of being a woman with limits placed around her so much in a foreign country, that it wasn't worth the fight in her mind. So right away when I sat down with Plath, I had that 20-plus-year-old journey with her in me, and just realizing her perception as this American wanting to fit in this small English village, wanting to understand where is my place, and then relating to these creatures, if we can call the bees creatures, and going, am I the queen? Where do I fit into this pecking order? Where do I fit in my community? Am I up for grabs? Am I naked? Am I fault? What is going on that I'm not picking up on that keeps me so unsettled? Is something that really struck me as we were going through this piece, in terms of, yeah, again, I know what that's like, and it sucks. And here we are 60 years later, and how much it changed for young women. Not much in a lot of ways.
Can I respond to that, Robin? I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed it, Athena, and I think that what's really striking is such a personal, as Plath writes so personally, and exposes herself in her poems in such a kind of extraordinary way, but that actually she manages, and through your performance, to also give us something that feels very relevant and relatable to sort of everybody's life experience, and particularly, and in a way we couldn't have known that, particularly now where actually our foundations have all felt quite shaken. And I just find it a really fascinating thing with Plath, that she's so in a way entirely about what she is experiencing, but she manages to also reflect something much more universal. as well. And I felt, you know, you captured that absolutely spectacularly.
Thank you. I think when Robin and I were discussing plans way back from the beginning, Robin pointed out that her death, so I think the words you used, Robin, was somehow it feels avoidable. And I was just wondering, yeah, and but it would take something like the past year we had to shake everyone else into things are not okay and let's not hide it anymore. I think, and that is really what she needed, and she didn't feel like she got.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when, you know, there's a whole train of thought in literary criticism, which is that we shouldn't bring writers' lives into interpretation of their work at all. And with Sylvia Plath in particular, that feels very, very difficult. But then I'm struck by listening to you all speak about that is absolutely not the way of a performer, because the way you can bring an audience in is you have to relate it to something in you. You're not always playing yourselves, of course, but you find something that resonates with you. And so it's always about making it personal.
Can I, like, I think there's a conversation there about choice, like what the actor chooses to share of their own self and how vulnerable they choose to go. It's you can choose how much is a mask and how much you want to share. Like, there is the version where it's like, oh, should we be really intense? And there's some really dark things that the actors have done in the favor of method. If you look at Guardian articles from 2015, that is like not okay. And like, we need to really assess what makes a good performer, but that performer has the ability to choose what they share. Sometimes when, and I get super angry about, I get aggy about this, like when it's looking at a writer's life, the writer has chosen to share their work. Like when you start, that is what they've given you of them, and you can take what you want. But when you start to look at the biography and start to make an assumption through your own lens of what that is, then that is very different from what they chose to you know, you can take from their art and go, this is what I understand and relate to. But when you look at born X, died X, was it through that or that, then that is an assumption that you make when you of not knowing somebody, and that has to be a decision about like how salacious we want to be. Like, they gave you their art. Sorry, I get really.
No, I think it's really important, and I think it's particularly relevant with Plath, because in a way, her biography, I mean, her art is very highly regarded, quite rightly so, but her biography almost eclipses the art in a way that makes me angry too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Kat and Robin just said as well. I think in classical music, there's also there's like a case like Jacqueline Dupre or something, or somebody like that, where it's almost seedy, the interest in her personal life. It's not that it's irrelevant or that no one should know anything about it. I think it's just there's a difference between absorbing everything you can about somebody when preparing, and then deliberately putting it as a filter for how you choose to interpret. And I think what Kat said is dead on about, well, actually, maybe it's in there and it's not for you to necessarily sort of start digging around, because as you said, Kat, like there's only so much you can actually find out. So you're sort of being quite arrogant by assuming that you can, you know, sum somebody up like Sylvia Plath or an artist like that.
And there's a little bit about the intention of the digging, like, because I also think that I contradict myself, having come to this by working on a piece about Afra Ben and having written about the Brontes, about their lives rather than their work. So definitely like contradiction. But I guess it's like, why is that? Like, there's a lot about the plays of Andrea Dunbar, and are we looking at it because we think, oh, let's look at the dirty stuff because it's gritty, and we have a really weird obsession with stuff like that, like the true crime thing? Or are we looking because we go, that story is inspiring and means something and can empower people to do something in the now and take action? Like, what is the intention and the choice that we make when we look at that?
Kat, is it not I mean, for me, all of those things make absolute sense, but you know, in the end, when whatever material we're looking at, it's only ever interesting where you as a performer and that material meet. So you can spend hours and hours and hours researching or digging around or thinking that you've somehow come to a rehearsal process, you know, knowing everything there is to know about it. Well, actually, it's not irrelevant, but it also sometimes kind of is, because what you need is yourself and the material, and to work out what happens when you put those things together. And actually, I mean, it sounds a bit naff, but there's a magic in that, because actually you can't be anything. I mean, the color that you know, for singers and for actors, literally vocal color, you know, what you're bringing to it, it can only be you, and that meeting is what's interesting. So I think, you know, of course, none of us can not know things. So none of us can not know what happened to Sylvia Plath. We can't not know it, which is in a way a shame, because wouldn't it be interesting to read the B meeting and not know any of those things and just go, I wonder what happened to her. And anyway, this is a thing that can exist by itself. But I mean, certainly in terms of the kind of performance process, it is all about, you know, the two things meeting. I mean, you can choose how they meet, but that's certainly.
Well, it's a bit like psychoanalyzing in French. Like, the second you go, yeah, you're definitely thinking you had a crap childhood. I'm just like, I'm out. You're not seeing all of me here.
Mm-hmm.
You are reducing me, and maybe I did have a crap childhood, but that isn't the only reason why I say what I say or why I do what I do. It's a failure to imagine people complexly in like any relationship. You've got to be willing to do that in order for the performance to work.
Yeah. Well, to use Shakespeare as an example, we don't even really know very much about his life at all. We have only very surface knowledge, so we're deprived of that, and yet that doesn't mean that we appreciate his work any less. So
can I jump in as a sort of, you know, composer voice here and say, there was something that Joe said earlier on about you shouldn't be trying to put things on it, but you should be trying to find the things that are in it about a piece of work. And this discussion we've had about context and life context and things like that, you know, it happens in music all the time. We know that Mozart's Requiem is his last work. We know that he died in the middle of writing it. So there's all this kind of mythology about it, that he knew it's for him and he knew it was dying and it's his final statement. But it's, you know, if you look at it objectively, yes, it's of that time and it's of that place and it's of that moment. But you need to understand Mozart's life to put that piece in context. But then you need to understand, what did he put into that piece, and then perform it from that point of view. And, you know, just thinking about the Dickinson songs, I have no idea pretty much now what was going through my mind specifically at the time, or what I had for lunch, or what I may have been fighting with. But those pieces are in and of themselves, so they are self-contained. But in giving the notes to Flora to sing, I'm basically saying these are the pieces, and I'm a composer who, you know, there's a story about another composer who I won't name, that they said, should this bit be loud or soft? And he said yes. And it's kind of, you know, you just kind of bring yourself to it. As long as you do what's on the page and don't do anything that's specifically wrong, then I want you to bring your own interpretation to it. And I want you to bring yourself to that piece and see it from your own point of view. And, you know, this discussion about artist background, it also brings with it this assumption that we as writers are incapable of writing anything that doesn't, you know, somehow encapsulate our entire being and all our experiences. And that's just not true. We choose what we want to reveal in each piece of work. So, you know, for a composer, a symphony might be their sort of grandiose statement about what's going on in their mind at that particular time or that particular place. But something else can be entirely different. And, you know, there is a kind of tendency these days to psychoanalyze, and especially, as we say, with Sylvia Plath, when you know the background to her life, very difficult to remove the poetry from it and take those kind of layers of paint off it and see it with the fresh wood and sort of approach it afresh. Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of throw in that from my point of view, that, you know, you're giving part of yourself, but then you're giving it to somebody else to perform. And then they come at it with their own experiences, and the performance is different many times. It's often revelatory as well for me as a writer, to hear different people coming at the same piece of music from entirely different angles. And I think, oh, I never imagined it like that, but it works. It's the trick is to write something that has enough in it to sustain that kind of flexibility, to be pushed and pulled in different directions. But not every piece is everything that I am, and probably thank heavens for that, really.
I totally agree. Like, sometimes you write something and like somebody performs it, and I don't know about anybody else, and if this is the case for you, Nicholas, but like sometimes I don't remember writing stuff.
Yeah.
Like I've not a clue. Like, if someone said, oh, what were you feeling at that point? I don't know. Like, I'll be the piece that I wrote for this, I came back to, like, I just wrote it on an evening. I don't remember writing it. I came back to it 2 days later and went, oh, wasn't that bad? Like, I literally didn't remember writing it. And so I sometimes wonder, you know, we do this psychoanalyzing it, like, was Shakespeare like on the bog and just was like, oh, I'll note that one. Oh, that's a funny one. I'll stick that one down. And I hadn't a clue. And then when you hear other people write it, like, some people say things and you're like, did I genuinely question if I ever wrote it.
Can I just quickly, this is great, and I think you very articulately explained what I was inarticulately suggesting, which is that I suppose what I was trying to say is that the key thing is that performers bring something of themselves, and you're absolutely right, Cats, choose how much of themselves to reveal, and so it's that relationship between the performer and the original material that is what makes live performance and new performance so exciting. Which brings me to talk about the aerial songs, Joe, which is really wonderful to hear, and the fact that they were written specifically for Ian Charleson.
Yeah.
And how, you know, whether you were thinking, whether that influenced you when you're preparing to perform.
It was, I don't know if it did or not, in a way, because a big break, I keep remembering this at the moment, a big breakthrough happened for me when I was studying, and I was singing a Mozart piece in an acting class. And the teacher just came up and whispered into my ear, so no one in the class could hear. Just ignore all of the recordings you've listened to, and just do it like no one's ever done it before. And then it just was completely different. And everything I've done since then, I've sort of tried to do that. But also, everything I sing was probably written for someone specific as well. Even the 250-year-old operas, they had our voice in mind, and they changed the notes to fit the voice that they had. But I'm very lucky, because actually in some ways the range of my voice is quite close to Ian Charleson's, and Guy Wolfenden clearly heard things in his voice that influenced the way that he wrote the piece. I mean, I think if you're writing he was obviously known as a singer, but primarily an actor. And I think for that high tenor kind of thing is such an unusual thing to come across. But I did what I usually do, which is to listen to the recording a lot at first, and then just completely stop listening to it and work on it. And if I listen to it again now, I'd have forgotten a lot. So I think I don't consciously do it. I just think I work it into the back of my mind, is as best as I can put it. So no, it wasn't that different really. And I don't think it's a little bit like what we were saying about the creation of work as well. The interpretation isn't that dissimilar in terms of the fact that you're sometimes surprised by what comes out. We're trained not to listen to our own voices when we're singing. So when you listen back to yourself, you think, oh, that wasn't actually. It's sort of the reading of the piece that I wanted, but the colours aren't always what you predicted. It's interesting.
Yeah, and maybe Kat and Athena, I sometimes have the experience of having writers in a room and their work's being discussed and they say, wow, you're making me sound very clever. Like
all the time, and they think you put things in there like thematically you've done this, and yes.
Well, maybe you have, but just you don't. It's not all intellectual, is it? It
That's
just
how much
comes
of
out
it
of
is
you.
just there. Like
Yeah.
I think I read something back. I read a playback that I'd written a few years ago, and then a new play, and I realized I was talking about fantasy writers with my partner and how like that when you world build, like there's so many things that like people build on things, but I was thinking, are those things choices, or sometimes like I put Nando's napkins in most of my plays and I didn't even know that I did, like, and I saw it in 3 different plays because I read and I didn't realize I thought in the most recent play I'm writing, I'll put a joke in about this. Turned out I did that joke already. Like, you just, how are you meant to know that you're not filtering all those things through in different stuff? You can't know what your influences are.
It's
just
just the thing.
Yeah.
I feel very cheated now, Kat, that the piece you wrote for Alphabet did not have Nando's napkins in it. I demand a rewrite.
I'll find a way. I'll put one in my pocket. I'll stuff it in my bra.
So from Shakespeare to Plath to Nando's napkins, that feels like an amazing place to leave this discussion. Thank you. Thank you so much to all of you for your time and for a really robust and interesting discussion, wide-ranging. For anyone watching this who hasn't yet watched the 2 concerts, Reshaping Shakespeare and Calming the Tempest, please do. They're really wonderful performances and a huge range of work, including new work by Jada Nuka, as well as Kat's poem and also Nicholas O'Neill's song cycle. So thank you very much to all of you for your time, and see you soon.
Good night. Thank you.
Right.